their work, dedicated and determined to deliver a fair election to their country. And that is a definition of courage, it's a definition of patriotism, and it deserves the gratitude of all Kenyans and the respect of all candidates in this election as they evaluate their future choices. Above all else, this election belongs to the people of Kenya. It is their hopes for the future that are on the line. And we who are privileged to observe do so very mindful of the fact that we are here supporting the legitimacy of the process, the sanctity of each Kenyan's vote. We are not here taking the side of any candidate or party. Our allegiance is to a peaceful, transparent, accountable, free, and fair election. Now, I'd just comment that I was serving as Secretary of State in 2013 when the last election took place. And in the aftermath of that, I had occasion to work with and talk to both candidates and try to work through differences of opinion about the outcome. I am convinced that goodwill and good faith and a proper analysis of this election and the rules which have guided it, that Kenya can move forward and embrace progress, significant progress in its democracy. We call on all the candidates, whether they are victors or losers in this race, to work within the rule of law and the legitimate dispute process in order to challenge any aspect of this election where they have evidence that somehow that dispute made a material difference on the outcome of the election. We affirm with conviction that the judicial process, the judicial system of Kenya, and the election laws themselves make full and adequate provision for accountability in this election. The streets do not. Now, I want to congratulate the people of Kenya for their patience and their calm and for turning out in large numbers to participate in choices about their future. Importantly, we would like to make clear the test of this election is really quite straightforward. It is whether the vote of registered Kenyans has been protected or is being or will be and will be counted in a manner that gives confidence through transparency and accountability to the overall election. That's the test. It is our firm conclusion that the IEBC has put in place and is thus far following a detailed process of paper ballot counting and security, which, if followed through to the final steps, can give each Kenyan confidence that their vote was properly recorded and that therefore this election can appropriately certify the outcome. Yes, we observed minor variances here and there that evidenced a deviation from the established process, but none that we thus far feel affected the overall integrity of the process. Now, there are things that need to be refined and corrected, lessons that need to be applied, but believe me, this is true of almost any election anywhere. The bottom line is that we believe the IEBC put in place a detailed, transparent process of voting, counting, reporting, and securing the vote, all of which lends significant credibility and accountability, and therefore can, when and if followed through to the end, provide confidence in the results. That is what is important to each and every Kenyan's vote. Now, we witnessed in more than 400 different observation posts, at random choices around the country, agents for many candidates all being simultaneously included in reaching an understanding of what constituted a valid ballot. We witnessed multiple parties sharing in the simultaneous counting of each ballot, in the opening and shutting of the polling stations, in the opening and the sealing of the ballot boxes, after themselves counting. We witnessed the signing off of multiple parties who publicly agreed on the final tallies of the 34A counting summaries, and who received copies of those documents on the spot. All of this provides an extensive, traceable trail of agreement by many parties on the paper balloting process and therefore on the outcome, including a vast majority of stations where both NASA and Jubilee agents were present and both signed off, in certainly the vast majority of those stations sampled by the observers in many places around the country. In the end, let me emphasize, it is the paper ballots and the accounting process established by the IEBC that tell the story of this election, not the electronic transmission of those numbers. So we call on all Kenyans to carefully evaluate the facts and the details of the process that the IEBC put in place and has been painstakingly following. We hope they will agree with us that when fairly and fully implemented to completion, that process provides Kenyans with the integrity of this election. Dr. Toure.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me tell you how much I enjoyed observing the Kenyan election process with Secretary John Kerry on behalf of the Carter Center, whom I like to recognize for its great work in supporting democracy in our continent, in the African continent. Secretary Kerry and I come obviously from two different backgrounds, but yet we share the universal language of democracy. And then naturally we came to the same fundamental conclusion he shared with you. As a Senegalese, as an African, I'm very satisfied with the fact that Kenyan people went to the electoral booths in large numbers. On election days, I witnessed very long lines of men and women, some carrying babies, all patiently waiting to exercise their political rights. I saw party agents sitting together the whole day, quietly discussing. The same atmosphere prevailed during the counting process. Presiding officers, I saw, knew what they have to do and treated voters with civility. These are excellent signs for democracy in Kenya. Like Senegal, Kenya is a country made of a large number of young people. Actually, I think 60% of the population might be below 35, like in Senegal. Our African young people must grow up in the culture of democracy, so they believe and respect the institution and the leaders people choose for themselves through fair and free elections. This election that took place marked, to my view, progress, as they were much more peaceful than the previous ones. No incidents were noted on election day, although, as Secretary Kerry said, the brutal murder of Chris Musanto is still a shock to everybody, and it must be investigated fully, and the murderers must be brought to justice. I like to also recognize the hard and good work of IEBC, that is the most important body, as we know, in organizing these elections. All staff, I think, honored the memory of their assassinated colleagues by staying focused and dedicated to their task. They need to be recognized and even congratulated. IEBC must continue its work to its end while substantiating its result with the Form 34A and Form 34B, and I understand that is going on. I heard that there might be 3 women governors. I would be delighted if it is confirmed because women must be involved at decision-making level. And I take the opportunity, Madam Minister, in front of me, to strongly recommend that the constitutional provision of the 2/3 be implemented the soonest, so Kenya lives up to its CEDAW commitment, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Soon, ladies and gentlemen, we will hear final result from IEBC, and I would like to see all candidates accept the verdict of the Kenyan people. The winner must be gracious in their victory. The candidates who are not lucky this time around, and I used also to lose election, I know how it feels, but they just must carry on their political commitment. Those who will contest the result must take their case to court. And at the end, the Kenyan democracy will just keep growing stronger and stronger. Thank you.
So we're happy to answer a few questions. I'm not sure how. We just will recognize a few people.
Over here.
I might comment that as Dr. Touré was talking about babies being carried, people who had a baby got to go to the front of the line, and I want you to know I saw the same baby go up several times until they finally marked the baby.
That's what happened.
So this was a very enterprising effort.
Okay.
Anyway, lucky baby.
Okay.
Early indoctrination.
Sophie Mukwena from the South African Broadcasting Corporation. The statement by the opposition leader Raila Odinga on issue of hacking, have you looked at that? And also the statement continued to raise questions, and you look in the streets of Nairobi, it is quite, it's very quiet. It looks like people are scared. What is your message to the Kenyans? Should they continue with business as usual?
Do you want to go ahead, Dr. Ray? I'll answer after.
Definitely, I said it in my statement. Mr. Odinga met with the team of observers who accepted to hear his case. I do believe that what he's saying deserves to be investigated later on, but his case has to be put forward to the IEBC, who should look into it as an allegation. But at this point, let's remember what was said. What matters is the Form 34A and the Form 34B. I do believe that all party agents received it. So it takes little effort to compare what party agents have in their hands to the official numbers. That's not very difficult to do. Because let's remember that at the end, behind any system, you have people. From Senegal, I think we went through different processes. We changed president 3 times in the last 2 decades. We don't have of any electronic process. It's all papers. And it can be trustful. So that's my answer to that. It deserves to be investigated, but yet it doesn't prevent from tallying 34As and 34Bs against what is going to be announced by IEBC. And in any case, it should be taken to the appropriate structured either court, IEBC first, and maybe court if there is dissatisfaction, so everything is dealt with within legal framework. And I would advise to the Kenyan people to keep being strong, as I said, go about their regular matters as they did. They made us very proud as African. When I saw long lines, I commended the discipline within the lines. As Secretary said, some babies, they had to be marked. I don't know whether it's within the Electoral Code, but sometimes you need to have some initiatives. But all was in good mood. And we must say that was a very good surprise, because before that, we hear that there was some fear. People reconnect to what happened in 2007 and 13. This is a huge way forward. And it's time for Africa to put behind the times and the days where every election would put fear in everybody. Election is not about, struggle. It should be actually a good moment for democracy. And that's the message I would like to put forward to our youth. They should not accept to be part of a violent game or anything like that. They should trust democracy. They should trust the institution. They would choose for themselves and trust the leaders. And the leaders must live up to the truth put in them when they choose them, by conducting themselves very decently and by, of course, conducting good governance. Thank you.
So let me comment also. We met yesterday with Mr. Odinga and some of his team, and we listened very carefully to his concerns that he expressed and were expressed publicly yesterday. And they deserve to be taken seriously. Any candidate's legitimate evidence of something that has happened needs to be judged, but it needs to be judged through the appropriate process. And you can't have members of your party or others engaging in a kind of threat unveiled to the public when you say, go to work for now, but we may need you, call to action at some point in time. That is not the way to proceed forward here. If there's a legitimate complaint, then there is a process, as I said very clearly, for the airing of that complaint and the appropriate democratic evaluation of whether or not that complaint is legitimate. Now, let's assume for a moment that it is. That there was somebody who somehow got in, if they did or didn't. The question is, were they able to change any material results? Were they able to change anything? And that is measurable. The integrity of the election process remains completely open to a process of transparent accountability for all the people of Kenya. So if it did take place, the Form 34As, which are in the hands of agents, in the boxes, transmitted immediately, can all be determined as to whether or not they were altered or whether or not something happened that made it different. That is the force, frankly, and effectiveness of the IEBC's decision to have this painstaking process, which is now being carried out form for form, line for line, vote count for vote count. And that is what ultimately can give the integrity to this electoral process. So are there variations in those? Thus far, it does not appear as if there are. And thus far, it appears as if the reports that were made with everybody watching. I mean, I sat there and looked at and listened to this very bright, capable young woman who managed this particular polling station, who brought everybody in a remarkably inclusive and friendly way. And she said, now, here's what I've put into the machine. Look at it. Everybody got to look at the numbers. She said, okay, do you all agree? Yes, I agree. I'm going to push send. She sent. And out it went, and everybody was happy. Now, that, it seems to me, is a measure of the reality of what did or didn't take place in this election. And I'm not vouching for the final product because it's not over yet. But what I am vouching for is that, and what I think we are all vouching for, is that there is in place a process which will allow that integrity to be measured and that can ultimately resolve disputes with respect to the question of hacking or any other situation here. Now, on the issue of fear and what people are feeling, it seems to me that if the workers who had the most reason to feel immediately intimidated because of a murder, the direct colleagues of Chris Masando, if the people who were on that commission could go to work the next day and say, we're going to have an election, then I think every Kenyan ought to take strength and resolve from that and be ready to go to work and prove that the democracy which he died for and that they voted for is going to work, and that they're not going to be intimidated. And they should also make clear to their leaders, whomever they are, whatever level of government, that they want a responsible reaction to whatever comes with this election. I know what it's like to lose an election. I lost by one state, the presidency of the United States. And I had a lot of reasons to complain about what happened in Ohio or other states. But you got to get over it and move on. And I'm not saying one can or the other. If Mr. Kenyatta winds up losing in this race, he has to make a decision to cede power, and he has to do what is appropriate. If Mr. Odinga was, who knows? Let's see where the count comes out. But what we're here to affirm today, so that this doesn't get out of control and somehow become subject to rumor and speculation, is the process that was put in place is proving its value thus far, that the capacity to prove every vote is there, and that the sanctity of those votes is being protected as we sit here today. And as long as the process is carried out over these next hours and days, and remember, the process allows for 7 days, as long as that is being carried out, people need to respect this process. Too much has been invested in this not to do that. And Kenya has made a remarkable statement to Africa, to the world, about its democracy and about the caring for that democracy. Don't let anybody besmirch that.
Maybe if we could take 3 questions at a time so we can allow a few people to ask questions, and then we'll allow the co-leaders to respond. So I see one over here, one here, and another here.
Thank you very much. I'm Tom Wolf from Ipsos. We understand, of course, at this point, the observer missions are just giving preliminary reports, but in terms of looking forward to more complete ones, two questions. We know ever since that the audit of the voters register was completed and delivered by KPMG to IEBC, there's been questions raised as to whether 19.5 million living Kenyans are actually on that voters register. And I wondered if up to now the Carter Center group has been able to give any guidance or shed any light on just how many of those 19.6 or whatever it is million voters are actually alive. Because without having that figure, we won't really be able to calculate voter turnout when the election is over. And the second question is with regard to, at least provisionally, and I may be incorrect, we have a much higher percentage of rejected plus spoiled ballots in this election than was finally the case in the last one. And again, without trying to preempt, the subsequent or the final report from the Carter Center group, will you be in a position to shed light on what actually happened with regard to the votes that wouldn't be counted, which is very important because based on the Supreme Court judgment in 2013, only valid votes go into the calculation of whether the 50% plus one threshold has been met. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things that...
Secretary Kerry, let me take
I'm
another
sorry, we're
couple
going to take
questions
several. I
first, and then
apologize. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, my name is Stanley from Kenya Television Network, KTN. A follow-up on the Form 34A. It will be of course recounted to confirm that the transmission that were done electronically, whether they concur with what the IEBC will find as the final results. should there be any alterations that will be found in these results, what is the international community going to do in place to make sure that they sustain peace, because that's what all the Kenyan people want, in bid to ensure that there is no chaos that come out of it, or any tension that comes out of the results that will come, with the probability that there could be alterations or there could be no alterations.
Thank you. And one last one here.
My name is Sarah from the SABC. So are you saying Raila Odinga is speaking too soon? Should he wait for the process to come to a conclusion, then he can make his comments or move to court? And secondly, the Kenyan law allows Kenyans to go to the streets legally to protest. So should Odinga's supporters feel they don't like the outcome of the results, then should the Kenya police protect them to go out on the streets and express their grievances?
Thank you.
So we'll both tackle these and give you our opinions on them. Well, the people who voted were alive.
You saw them in the line.
I didn't see any dead people walking around. Yeah. I think one of the virtues of the Keem's process, frankly, and a lot of people had questions, and myself included, about relying on this electronic process for just even the start of the vote. And we were struck by the fact that in most cases it worked. I mean, it sometimes took 1 or 2 or 3 imprints, but it worked. And that really you don't hear a lot of contest about who did or didn't vote because of that. It's really a virtue of this election, that the biometrics and the pre-working and the fact that everybody had to come with their card, present their card, had a picture of them, you look and see if that person is the person, then they do the biometrics, and if that failed, they occasionally had to go to the alphanumeric process, but then that also was a check. So it was, pretty certain about the folks who were actually winding up voting, and less people voted in most of the polling stations than were eligible to vote, which we were surprised about. I mean, there was slightly lower level of turnout in effect. I think it was somewhere in the 70% or so. So I think that the validity of the ballots of people who voted is pretty intact here. I do not see any major question about that. With respect to the rejected ballots, the early indications that we have, and they're early, not a final assessment, and yes, the Carter Center will try to evaluate that as best as possible. And again, the virtue of this system is those ballots are there, and they can be evaluated in order to try to determine what happened. But the early evaluation is it was a question of voter education, that they simply didn't have enough opportunity and not enough people were able to be. But again, people agreed on what was a valid ballot and what was not a valid ballot. And I listened to the person managing the particular counting we saw say specifically, a check here, is that valid? Everybody agreed. An X here, is that valid? Everybody agreed. A dot here, is that valid? Everybody agreed. A line that goes through into another one, and they determined where the check began. But if it was just a line without a check, it was not valid. So there was a very precise process of determining each and every ballot. And my judgment is that we'll be able to get to the bottom of the rejected ballot issue because there is accountability. On the electronic alteration, if found, it's our understanding that one of the parties, one of the principal parties, specifically requested the early posting in order to not allow time for anybody to do anything. So they wanted an immediate posting. Now that posting should have been labeled somehow. Provisional people didn't know what it was labeled. That certainly is one of the things we picked up on as a thing that needs to be corrected. But again, whether or not the 34A is ultimate, I mean, the 34A is the ultimate measure, and the ultimate measure is the constituency. The constituency is the only place where something could have been affected. IBC specifically is not allowed to make an alteration. And that goes back to the court ruling and to the 2013 election. So there shouldn't be alterations, and anything that happens will be accountable between the 34A and the 34B. So that is again why we sit here saying we think we have confidence that the integrity of this election is there for the measuring of the ballots themselves. And it does not rely on some electronic message. It relies on the pieces of paper that were filled out with a lot of people watching it. And that remains yet to be fully measured by the end product here. We're not making a final determination, as I said, and it is yet anybody who has a discrepancy that they believe ought to be judged appropriately, there's a court process and a challenge process for that. Why don't you take the last one or in more, because I'm...
Yeah, well, let me get back again to the Ipsos question about auditing the register. We went through it in Senegal the past 3 months. It's not a simple and easy exercise. And of course, it has to be audited on a regular basis so you can get out, those who passed away and etc. But what matters is the numbers that went out and expressed themselves. I think that was important. And we saw the lines. I mean, people were there and people voted. But I think that's a question to be taken into account, to regularly sort of go to your registrar so you can update it. I think there is also a need, and that's part of the recommendation of the Carter Center, to keep educating the voters. It's not an easy process. I must say I was wondering how it would work with 6 ballots, but I was impressed the way people, very quietly went and chose the right color and put the paper in the right color. So I find it quite impressive that it went smoothly, because we do know that we still have to improve our literacy rates, and I was wondering, well, how do an illiterate person would make the difference between the governor ballot and the presidential ballot and the parliament? But it went well. But that keeps, education should also be part of what IEBC will be doing in the upcoming months and years. So the citizens are more confident when they go to vote, and I think that would sort of diminish the rejected ballot. That's my thinking. As for tallying the forms, 30AB, and what comes out of the electronic system, I think it's a pretty straightforward process. As we said, they should not be, if the actors have confidence in themselves and in each other, because it's a matter of, trusting each other. And I like to emphasize that. Democracy is also about trusting each other as different actors and trusting your system and the institution. It's important to build that trust between the actors. That's why I talked about, those who had victory and those who failed. The dialogue should continue to improve the process. And I think for this election, if people sit down, the party agent, IEBC, they should be able to tally, and there should not be huge discrepancy. That's what I think from what I have seen. So if people are not happy, should they exercise their constitutional rights by protesting? I think that was one of the questions. I say, well, peaceful protest, of course, because there is a difference between both. I do think that at this point, nothing should be protested yet, because the process is not completed. And I do believe that if things continue the way they are, if actors have trust between themselves, they would not be necessary even to protest. That's my conviction. From what I know, from my own background, we have changed different 3 presidents, and I was saying that at 9:30 for the last election I witnessed in Senegal, I happened to be the campaign manager of the current sitting president. We closed the booth at 6. At 9:30, the former president placed a phone call, and that was it. And I think, it should happen. It must happen in Kenya, and it must happen in the whole continent again. And I think we are making great progress toward that.
Other questions? Okay, one in the back.
Daniel Finnan, Radio France International. Just going back to something that you said, Sir John Kerry, you said that people should have confidence in the paper ballots and the accounting process and not the electronic transmission. For me, that kind of undermines the electronic transmission. What's the point of that if it's not part of the process?
Well, it's a tool. It's a transmission. It's taking something that was put in print, you scan it, and you send it. If it doesn't get sent, that doesn't change what was on the piece of paper. So what I'm saying is the bottom line story here comes not in the, gee, the system broke down, the server crashed, and it didn't transmit, but whether or not the paper is certifiable as being what it was. And that's the issue here. So that's why I say it comes down, I mean, that's the virtue of this. This was simply a tool to transmit quickly, to try to get results rapidly. But that didn't work as well as everybody wanted. So the backup is you still have the paper. And that's what protects the sanctity of every Kenyan's vote.
If there are no other questions, then we'll conclude the press conference now. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you, madam.